Salt-crusted boots pressed firmly against weathered planks as Captain Elias Blackwood stood sentinel at the edge of Port Royal's forgotten pier. His silhouette, hard as iron against the misty harbour, had become a fixture these past 30 nights. Weather-beaten hands clutched a silver compass that hadn't pointed north in decades, its needle perpetually drawn to a promise made long ago. The moonlight caught the jagged scar running from eye to jaw, a reminder that even the most feared pirate of the Caribbean carried wounds time couldn't heal. Locals whispered about the intimidating figure, how he appeared each evening as the sun surrendered to darkness, how he waited until the last fishing boat returned, then disappeared until the next nightfall. Some claimed he was a ghost, others a madman chasing shadows. Tonight would be different. As Elias turned to leave, a small figure emerged from the fog, barefoot and trembling, a boy no older than 10, with eyes that had seen too much sorrow, approached with determined step. The tempest swayed gently in Port Royal harbour, her black sails furled tight, her fearsome reputation at odds with her current dormancy. Below deck, Josiah Porter, first mate of 15 years, thumbed through the worn pages of the captain's logbook. Unlike the meticulously kept ship's log, this private ruins contained entries both cryptic and troubling. 30th night, still nothing. Perhaps the debt remains unpaid. The latest entry was as sparse as the 29 before it. Josiah snapped the book shut when heavy boots descended the stairs. Captain Elias Blackwood's imposing figure filled the cabin doorway, bringing with him the scent of rum and sea salt. "Another wasted evening, Captain," Josiah ventured. Elias removed his weathered coat. "Until all 30 nights are completed, none are wasted." The men grow restless. Sanders and Walsh speak of better prospects with the Fleming crew. "Let them go." Elias poured amber liquid into a tarnished cup. "I made a vow upon my blood to Jonathan Hayes. 30 nights at the Eastern Dock, one for each man lost under my command." Josiah had served Elias long enough to know when certain subjects were forbidden. Jonathan Hayes was one such topic, a name that made the captain's knuckles whiten around whatever he held. "A strange boy approached me tonight," Elias said suddenly. "A beggar. Something different about this one." Elias traced the scar along his jaw. Eyes like... He stopped himself. Morning brought no relief from the tension aboard the Tempest. Crewmen cast sidelong glances as their captain emerged from his quarters. Once they would have averted their eyes in deference or fear. Now their gazes held questions. Willem, the youngest crew member, dared to approach. "Captain, rumors say we'll make port in Nassau next week." "Rumors are a plague on sensible men," Elias replied. "We remain in Port Royal until I say otherwise." The marketplace buzzed with activity as Elias made his way through the crowd. His reputation parted the throng better than any blade. Merchants who once cowered at his approach now displayed subtle signs of diminishing respect. A delayed nod, a fractionally less generous measure of supplies. "Becoming a fixture of our humble port, Captain Blackwood," remarked Harrington, the harbour master, his ledger open. "Another week's docking fee, the usual arrangement." Elias placed a small pouch of coins on the ledger. "Arrangement implies mutual benefit," Harrington countered. "Your extended stay without explanation stirs unwanted attention from authorities." Elias leaned close. "Does my gold spend differently than others?" "Not at all, but your reputation spends quite differently." Harrington glanced toward the naval office. "The new Commodore asks questions about pirate captains who linger too long." The day crawled by, each hour bringing the night watch close. At dusk, Elias assumed his position at the eastern pier, as predictable as the tide. From his vantage point, he could see the Tempest and beyond it, the vast ocean that had been his only true home for 20 years. His hand found the silver compass in his pocket. The needle spun lazily before settling, not on north, but toward the northwest, toward a promise made to a dying man. "You're here again." The small voice startled him. The boy from the previous night stood nearby, thin shoulders squared with determination. "Go home, boy. Elias said without looking at him. I don't have much of one left, the child replied. My name is Timothy Hayes. Hayes. The name hit Elias like a broadside. He studied the boy properly now. The set of his jaw, the color of his eyes. You have your father's look about you, Elias said quietly. You knew him. Hope illuminated Timothy's face. Once, Elias turned back toward the sea. A lifetime ago, he said if anything happened to him, I should find Captain Blackwood. Timothy stepped closer. It took me nearly a year to find you, and now you have. What would you have me do? Save my mother, Timothy said simply, by making her your wife. Timothy clutched a small wooden toy boat in his weathered hands, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings along its hull. The craftsmanship spoke of patience and love, a father's final gift. My father wasn't dead when he gave me this, Timothy explained, holding it up to the lantern light. He said it would help me remember that even the smallest vessel can weather the mightiest storm. Elias regarded the boy with measured caution. Children were rare in his world, appearing only as distant figures on passing merchant ships, or as hollow-eyed urchins, scraping survival from port town alleys. Yet this one spoke with the earnest gravity of someone far beyond his years. Your father, Elias said carefully. Jonathan Hayes was a naval officer. What business would he have directing his family to a pirate? Timothy's gaze dropped to the toy boat. He said you were enemies who became friends, that you owed him a life debt, and he never collected. The night air suddenly felt thicker in Elias's lungs. The boy was either remarkably well coached, or telling a truth no one else could know. My mother doesn't know I'm here, Timothy continued. She works mending sails until her fingers bleed. But it's not enough. The landlord says we'll be out by month's end. His voice cracked. She coughs blood now. There are charitable houses. We tried. Timothy's interruption carried a bitterness no child should possess. They turned us away when they learned my father died under suspicion of aiding pirates. Elias felt the familiar weight of consequences cascading from past actions. Jonathan Hayes, decorated lieutenant, his reputation ruined for the crime of showing mercy to the wrong man. Even if what you say is true, boy, how would marriage help your mother? You have a ship, protection. She needs medicine, food. Timothy looked up, his face transformed by a desperate hope. Father said Captain Blackwood repays his debts with interest. Did he now? Elias's voice had gone dangerously soft. He said you were the most honorable, dishonest man he'd ever known. A ghost of a smile touched Elias's lips before vanishing. Your father had a peculiar sense of humor. Will you at least meet her? See for yourself? Timothy pressed, seizing the momentary softening. Before Elias could refuse, the harbor bell rang 9 times. Timothy startled. I must go. She'll notice I'm missing. He backed away, clutching his boat. Tomorrow night, I'll bring you to our house. It wasn't a question. Boy, Elias called, as Timothy turned to run. This toy, your father made it. During his last shore leave, 3 days before Timothy swallowed, before the maelstrom. The name of the naval vessel hung in the air between them. The ship Jonathan Hayes had been serving on, when it encountered the tempest in a fateful battle 7 years ago. Tomorrow then, Elias said, the words escaping before wisdom could contain them. Timothy nodded and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elias alone with memories he'd spent years drowning in rum and gunpowder. The following evening Elias found himself waiting again, this time with purpose. The crew had noted his changed demeanor, how he'd inspected the ship with renewed attention, ordered repairs he'd previously delayed. Planning to sail soon, Captain? Josiah had asked. Perhaps. Timothy appeared exactly at 8 bells, clutching his toy boat like a talisman. You came. A Blackwood keeps his word, even one carelessly given. They walked in silence through increasingly narrow streets. The respectable quarters of Port Royal gave way to cramped alleys where necessity had long ago devoured dignity. Women watched them pass with hollow eyes, while men slipped into doorways, recognizing danger even wrapped in fine clothes. There, Timothy pointed to a listing structure sandwiched between a cooperage and what appeared to be an abandoned storehouse. "We have the upper room." Elias surveyed the building with a practiced eye. "The roof leaks." "Only when it rains," Timothy replied with unexpected humor. As they approached, a hacking cough echoed from the open window above. Timothy's face tightened with worry. "She's gotten worse," he whispered, suddenly seeming every bit his young age. "Please help her. Please." Elias Blackwood, scourge of the Spanish Main, felt an unfamiliar sensation as he looked down at the boy's pleading face, the distinct feeling of standing at a crossroads not marked on any chart. The narrow staircase creaked under Elias's weight as he followed Timothy upward. Before reaching the top, the captain paused, withdrawing a folded paper from his inner pocket. The letter had been read so many times that the creases threatened to separate the page into quarters. Yellowed with age and sea spray, the ink had faded, but remained legible. "Captain," it began simply, in the precise handwriting of a naval officer, "if you are reading this, I have failed to return. The fever worsens. I write now with clarity that may soon abandon me. Remember our agreement on the deck of the Maelstrom, life for life, debt for debt. Should misfortune find me, I would ask you to ensure my family doesn't suffer for my choices. They reside in Port Royal at Mrs. Winter's lodging house on Cooper's Lane. This request isn't made lightly. I entrust them to your honor, not your pity. Lieutenant J. Hayes." Elias refolded the letter, returning it to his pocket. He had received it 2 months ago, delivered by a merchant Tatsant who claimed a dying sailor had paid his last coins for its passage. The 30 nights of waiting had begun the very evening it arrived. Timothy glanced back, curious about the delay. "Mother doesn't know about father's connection to you," he whispered. "She believes he died honorably, and so he did," Elias replied, "more honorably than most who sailed under the king's colors." The memory surfaced unbidden. A storm-tossed night, 20 years past. Elias, not yet a captain but a young sailor on his first pirate crew, had been swept overboard during a raid on a merchant vessel. The brutal sea had nearly claimed him when strong hands grasped his collar. Lieutenant Jonathan Hayes, barely older than Elias himself, had pulled him aboard a naval longboat rather than letting him drown. "Even pirates deserve a trial," Hayes had said to his questioning crew. But there had been no trial. The naval vessel encountered a storm that separated the longboat from the main ship. For 6 days, Hayes and Elias fought together for survival, former enemies becoming reluctant allies. When finally rescued by a passing trader, Hayes had allowed Elias to leave freely, extracting only a promise: a life for a life someday. That someday had come 7 years ago, when the Tempest encountered the Maelstrom during a fierce battle. Elias, by then a feared captain, had recognized Hayes on the enemy deck. When the naval ship was crippled and sinking, Elias had ordered his men to rescue survivors, an unprecedented act of mercy from a pirate crew. Hayes had been among those pulled from the wreckage. "You repaid your debt today," Hayes had told him as they stood on the Tempest's deck. "Perhaps," Elias had replied, "but now you sail with pirates. Your naval career is finished." Hayes had smiled grimly. "Then we'll consider it a new debt between us." For nearly a year, Hayes had served on the Tempest, a naval officer among pirates, earning respect through skill and courage. Then came news of his wife's pregnancy. Elias had released him from service, allowing him to return to his family with a share of treasure and his strange honor intact. They had met only once more 3 years later, when Hayes sought Elias out to show him a sketch of his son. They had drunk together, reminiscing about their unlikely friendship, before parting ways. Elias had assumed their debt finally settled. Until the letter arrived. "Captain," Timothy's voice pulled Elias back to the present. They had reached the top of the stairs. "A moment, boy," Elias said, adjusting his coat and removing his hat. An unexpected gesture of respect he hadn't planned. Timothy pushed open the door. "Mother, I've brought someone." The room was small but meticulously kept. What little furniture remained showed signs of better days: a carved chair missing a finial, a table with mismatched legs. Near the window, where the last light of day filtered through clean but patched curtains, sat a woman bent over sailcloth, needle flashing in her thin hands. She looked up, and Elias felt time compress between heartbeats. Though illness had hollowed her cheeks and dulled her once auburn hair, he recognized Clara Hayes immediately. The captain's wife who had come aboard the Tempest once, years ago, to reclaim her husband. The woman who had looked at Elias with such contempt that even he, hardened by years of violence, had felt something akin to shame. "Timothy, who is this man?" she asked. Her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. Before the boy could answer, recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a horror that struck Elias more powerfully than any broadside. "You," Clara whispered, dropping her sewing as she rose unsteadily. "Captain Blackwood." Timothy looked between them, confusion evident. "You know each other? Get away from him, Timothy." Clara's voice trembled with emotion rather than weakness. "This man is the reason your father never came home." Elias remained still, accepting the accusation without defense. The letter in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. "That's not true," Timothy hotitized. "Father told me." "What could you possibly know?" Clara interrupted, her eyes never leaving Elias. "You were barely 4 when he died, Mrs. Hayes." Elias finally spoke, his deep voice unnaturally subdued. "I understand your anger. Understanding requires humanity, Captain. Something you've demonstrated precious little of." She moved to stand between him and Timothy, a mother bear protecting her cub. "Why are you here? Haven't you taken enough from us?" Timothy stepped around his mother. "I brought him, Mother. I found him at the docks." Clara's face drained of color. "You did what?" "Father said if anything happened, Captain Blackwood would help us." The boy's certainty wavered beneath his mother's horrified expression. "When did he tell you this?" Clara demanded. "Before he left the last time. He gave me this too." Timothy hurried to a small trunk in the corner, retrieving something wrapped in faded silk. "He said not to show anyone, unless we found the captain." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a tarnished silver locket. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her throat where an identical piece had once rested. "My marriage locket," she whispered. "Jonathan took his half with him to sea." Timothy handed it to his mother. The locket was broken, the hinge damaged, but inside remained miniature portraits. Clara on one side, Jonathan on the other, both painted in happier times. "The clasp is broken," Timothy explained, "but Father said Captain Blackwood would know what it meant." Clara's gaze returned to Elias, questioning now rather than accusing. Elias cleared his throat. "Your husband saved my life, Mrs. Hayes. Twice, in fact. We served together for a time." "Served?" Clara's laugh held no humor. "Pirates don't serve, Captain. They take—" A coughing fit seized her then, violent enough to double her over. Elias instinctively stepped forward, but she waved him away, fumbling for a handkerchief. When she pulled it from her lips, crimson stained the white fabric. Timothy moved with practiced efficiency, pouring water from a cracked pitcher. "The medicine's gone," he said quietly, to Elias. 3 days now." The boy's matter-of-fact tone revealed how thoroughly childhood had been stripped from him. He'd become his mother's caretaker, a role no child should bear. "May I?" Elias gestured to the room's only chair. Clara nodded weakly, sinking back onto her stool by the window. The small space fell silent, except for her labored breathing. "Jonathan wrote to me," Elias finally said, "before he died. Asked me to look after you both. And yet we've struggled alone for years," Clara replied, though the venom had leached from her voice, replaced by exhaustion. "The letter reached me only 2 months ago." Elias studied the rough floorboard. "I've been waiting at the docks each night since, not knowing where to find you." Timothy perched on a wooden crate near his mother. "See, Father did trust him." Clara's fingers tightened around the broken locket. "Your father was an excellent judge of sailing conditions, but a poor judge of character. The insult slid off Elias like rain on oilskin. He'd been called far worse by better people. Regardless of what you think of me, Mrs. Hayes, I owe your husband a debt. I'm prepared to honor it. We don't need charity from a pirate. Not charity. Elias leaned forward. Jonathan and I had an arrangement. A life for a life. And what does that mean for us now? Clara asked, her expression guarded. Elias hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. The letter had been clear about his obligation, but vague about the means, and the boy's suggestion marriage seemed both outlandish and inappropriate. Before he could answer, heavier coughing racked Clara's frame. This time the handkerchief came away soaked with blood. She swayed, eyes fluttering. Elias moved without thinking, catching her as she collapsed. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, her body burning with fever. She needs a doctor, he said, lifting her effortlessly. We can't afford. I can. Elias's tone brooked no argument. Where's your nearest physician? Dr. Wilson, 3 streets over, Timothy replied, already moving to the door. But he refused to come last time without payment first. Elias adjusted Clara in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. He won't refuse me. Dawn found Elias on the deck of the Tempest, the first hints of sunlight illuminating the worn surface of a naval officer's medal in his palm. Jonathan Hayes had pressed it into his hand during their last meeting, insisting Elias keep it as a reminder of their unlikely bond. Captain Sire approached cautiously, noting his leader's pensive mood. The men are asking questions. Let them ask. Elias pocketed the medal. Has Fletcher returned? Aye. The physician is attending to the woman as ordered. The boy too. Elias nodded, gazing toward the town where Clara and Timothy remained under Dr. Wilson's care. The physician had indeed not refused Elias, especially after the captain dropped a small pouch of gold coins on his table. You've never explained your connection to these people. Josiah ventured. Elias considered his first mate, the closest thing to a friend he'd allowed himself since Hayes. Do you recall the naval officer who sailed with us? Lieutenant Hayes, the one who jumped ship after a year? Some called him a spy. He requested leave to return to his family. I granted it. Elias's tone hardened slightly. He was no spy. Understanding dawned on Josiah's weathered face. The woman and boy, his widow and son. Elias turned fully toward his first mate. Hayes saved my life before I was captain. Years later I saved his during the battle with the Maelstrom. I remember. You ordered us to pick survivors from the water. The men thought you'd gone soft. Perhaps I had. Elias leaned against the rail. Hayes wrote to me before he died, asking me to look after his family if they needed help. The letter only reached me 2 months ago, so that's why we've lingered in Port Royal. Josiah frowned. But what do you intend now? We can't stay here indefinitely. Redmond's crew was spotted in Kingston last week. The mention of Captain Redmond, Elias's longtime rival, and the man responsible for Hayes's final fatal mission, caused his jaw to tighten. One problem at a time, Josiah. Elias straightened. Have Farley and Quinn bring supplies to this address. Food, clean linens, medicine, whatever the doctor prescribes. The men won't like playing delivery boys to a naval widow. The men will do as ordered, Elias said flatly, or they're welcome to seek employment elsewhere. As Josiah left to relay the instructions, Elias returned his attention to the town. Something about Timothy's earnest face and Clara's fierce protection of her son had awoken memories he'd long suppressed. He had been only slightly older than Timothy when he first went to sea, not by choice but necessity after his mother's death and his father's descent into drunken violence. Later that day, Elias returned to Dr. Wilson's modest home, where Clara had been installed in the guest quarter. The physician met him in the study. The consumption is advanced, Captain, Wilson explained, polishing his spectacles. With proper rest, nutrition and my treatments, she may improve. But, speak plainly, Doctor. 6 months, perhaps a year with excellent care. Wilson replaced his spectacles. The boy should be prepared. Elias absorbed this news silently, then asked, "May I see her?" Wilson led him to a small but clean bedroom, where Clara rested, her breathing less labored than the previous night. Timothy sat beside her, clutching the broken locket. "She told me more about father," Timothy said without looking up as Elias entered. "How they met at a governor's ball, how he proposed 3 weeks later." Elias remained by the door, an intruder in this intimate scene. "Your father was nothing if not decisive. She also told me he died because of pirates." Timothy finally raised his eyes, but not how. Elias chose his words carefully. "Your father was assigned to track down a pirate crew. The mission went wrong." "Your crew?" "No." Elias's voice hardened. "Captain Redmond's. Your father and I an arrangement by then." Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Timothy." "I'm here, Mother." The boy took her hand. She turned slightly, registering Elias's presence with a frown. "Captain Blackwood, I thought perhaps I'd dreamed you." "No dream, Mrs. Hayes." Elias stepped closer. "Wilson has agreed to care for you until you're stronger." Clara's gaze shifted to the window, where crates of supplies were visible, newly delivered from the Tempest. "More charity, repayment of a debt," Elias corrected. "Nothing more. A debt that will be considered paid once I recover." Her direct gaze challenged him. Timothy interjected before Elias could respond. "I told the captain about father's request, Mother, about how he wanted Captain Blackwood to help us if anything happened." Clara's expression softened, looking at her son, then hardened again when she returned to Elias. "My husband had unusual friends for a naval officer." Jonathan saw beyond uniforms and flags. "Mrs. Hayes." Elias moved to leave. "A rare quality in these waters." Captain Timothy called as Elias reached the door. "Will you tell me how you and father became friends?" "Mother doesn't know the whole story." Clara tensed visibly at the question. "Another time, perhaps," Elias replied, sensing her discomfort. "When your mother is stronger." As he departed, Elias heard Clara's quiet words to her son. "There are some stories, Timothy, better left untold." The black flag with its blood-red skull fluttered against the morning sky, a symbol feared throughout the Caribbean. Unlike the traditional Jolly Roger, Captain Elias Redmond's banner featured a skull split by a jagged crimson crack, a reference to his preferred method of executing prisoners by cleaving their skulls. The Crimson Serpent glided into Port Royal Harbor like a predator, her gun ports closed, but her reputation making the harbor master's hands shake as he recorded her arrival. 3 weeks had passed since Elias first encountered Timothy, and news of Redmond's approach spread through the port like wildfire. "He's requested permission to dock for repairs and provisions," Josiah reported, watching the rival ship through his spyglass. Claiming peaceful intentions, Elias's laugh held no humor. "Redmond wouldn't recognize peace if it slit his throat. He's traveled with the tide. Will be anchored within the hour. Double the watch. No crew members ashore without armed escort." Elias's orders were crisp, and send someone to increase the guard at Doc Wilson's house. Josiah lowered his spyglass. "You believe he's here for the Hayes woman and her boy. I believe Redmond does nothing without purpose." Elias's hand unconsciously moved to the hilt of his sword, "and his arrival so soon after I've shown interest in the Hayes family cannot be coincidence." By midday, the taverns buzzed with tales of the 2 notorious pirate captains now sharing the same port. Merchants doubled their prices, whores tripled theirs, and the naval garrison remained conspicuously alert. The tentative peace held until sundown. Timothy slipped out of Dr. Wilson's house while the doctor attended his mother. Despite Elias's warnings to remain indoors, the boy had grown restless after weeks of confinement. His intention was innocent, to purchase a small gift for his mother from the market with coins he'd earned helping the doctor. The marketplace was clearing as he arrived, vendors packing away their wares. Timothy approached a flower seller, selecting a modest bouquet of local blooms. As he counted out his coins, a shadow fell across the stall. A young gentleman with an eye for beauty, remarked a cultured voice. Timothy looked up to find a tall man studying him with unsettling intensity. Unlike most pirates, Captain Isaiah Redmond dressed with understated elegance, no flamboyant coats or ostentatious jewelry, just quality clothing in subdued tones. Only the scars crisscrossing his knuckles and the calculating coldness in his eyes betrayed his violent profession. "For your mother, I presume?" Redmond asked, adding a coin to Timothy's pile. "Allow me to contribute." Timothy hesitated, instinctively wary. "Thank you, sir, but I can manage." Admirable independence. Redmond smiled without warmth. "You have the bearing of a naval officer's son." Timothy stiffened. "How did you? This is a small port, boy." "News travels." Redmond waved away the coin when Timothy tried to return it. "Keep it. Considerate respect, paid to Lieutenant Hayes's memory. You knew my father. We crossed paths." Redmond's expression revealed nothing. "I understand Captain Blackwood has taken an interest in your family's welfare." Timothy's pride overcame his caution. "He's helping because of a promise to my father." "Is he now?" Redmond's interest sharpened visibly. "And what promise might that be?" Before Timothy could answer, Clara's voice cut through the fading market noise. "Timothy!" She hurried toward them, face pale with exertion and fear. Wilson had permitted her first short walk outside, and she discovered her son missing. Her steps faltered as she recognized Redmond. "Captain," she acknowledged stiffly. "Mrs. Hayes." Redmond bowed slightly. "How fortunate to find you both. I was just discussing your husband's connection to Captain Blackwood with your son." Clara's hand gripped Timothy's shoulder. "My husband's associations are not a matter for public discussion, Captain Redmond." "Of course." Redmond's smile remained fixed. "Although I find it curious that Jonathan never mentioned his friendship with Blackwood during our acquaintance. Perhaps he was selective about his confidences." Clara's voice remained steady despite her obvious fear. "Timothy, we're leaving." As they turned away, Redmond called after them. "The broken locket, Mrs. Hayes. Did Blackwood mention its significance?" Clara froze momentarily but didn't respond, pulling Timothy along faster. Back at Doc Wilson's house, she collapsed into a chair, her brief excursion having taxed her limited strength. "How does he know about the locket?" Timothy asked. "Listen carefully," Clara whispered, gripping his hands. "Captain Redmond is dangerous, more dangerous than Blackwood. Promise me you'll stay away from him." "But he seemed to know father." "He knew your father as a hunter knows his prey." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Jonathan was assigned to bring Redmond to justice. Instead She broke off, coughing. That evening, Elias arrived to find Clara agitated, despite her weakness. When she told him of the encounter, his typically impassive expression darkened. Redmond approached the boy directly. The calmness of his voice belied the fury beneath. "And he mentioned the locket. What does it mean, Elias?" Clara had begun using his given name in recent days, a small sign of thawing relations. Why would Redmond care about a broken keepsake? Elias's response was to station 4 armed crewmen outside the doctor's house. "Pack your belongings," he told Clara. "Both of you. It's no longer safe here." "Where would we go?" Clara challenged. "The only place Redmond won't dare follow." Elias met her gaze directly. "My ship." Clara stood at the rail of the Tempest, her thin shawl offering little protection against the evening breeze. 3 days aboard the pirate vessel had done little to ease her discomfort, though she'd stopped flinching whenever a crewman approached. Timothy, by contrast, had taken to ship life with alarming enthusiasm, already learning knots from Fletcher, the boatswain. "He has his father's sea legs," Elias observed, joining her at the rail, "and his father's poor judgment regarding companions," Clara replied, though without her earlier venom. Elias allowed himself a rare smile. Jonathan always claimed good judgment brought him nothing but trouble. Below deck, the crew had given up their modest mess hall for Clara's quarters, hanging canvas partitions for privacy. Timothy slept in a small hammock nearby. The arrangement was temporary but had prompted considerable grumbling among the men. "Your crew resents our presence," Clara noted. "They'll adapt." Elias's tone brooked no argument. "Or they'll find another captain. You'd risk mutiny for us." Elias gazed across the harbor where the Crimson Serpent remained anchored. "I made a promise to my husband." Clara studied his profile, the scar along his jaw silver in the moonlight. "Tell me how you met him, the true story." Elias hesitated, then shared the tale of his rescue by the young naval lieutenant, their days adrift, and the unlikely friendship that followed. Clara listened without interruption, her expression softening incrementally. "That sounds like Jonathan," she finally said. "Seeing the best in people, even when it wasn't wise. He was a rare man." Elias reached into his pocket, withdrawing an ornate knife with a pearl handle. This was his. He carried it on every voyage. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she touched the knife. His guardian's knife. "His father gave it to him when he earned his commission. He gave it to me the day your son was born." Elias turned the blade, revealing an inscription. "For may it protect what matters most." He intended it for Timothy when he came of age. "Yet you've kept it all these years." "I was saving it." Elias offered her the knife, for when the boy needed a guardian. Clara didn't take it. "And you believe that time is now." Redmond wouldn't have approached Timothy without purpose. Elias's voice hardened. "Whatever game he's playing, your son is somehow part of it." "Because of the locket?" Clara touched the broken keepsake hanging from a ribbon around her neck. Before Elias could answer, shouts erupted from the main deck. Josiah appeared, his expression grave. "Captain, there's trouble." The boy. Elias moved with surprising speed for his size, Clara close behind despite her weakness. They found Timothy surrounded by a circle of crewmen, blood streaming from his nose, facing off against a burly sailor named Marsh. "He called my father a traitor," Timothy shouted, fists still raised despite being dramatically outmatched. "Lower your hands, boy," Elias commanded, his voice cutting through the commotion. "Marsh, explain yourself." The sailor spat on the deck. The whelp was prattling on about his noble father. "I merely pointed out that consorting with pirates isn't exactly honorable service." Timothy lunged forward again, only to be caught by Fletcher. "My father was a hero. Your father," Elias said clearly, "saved more lives than any man aboard this vessel, including mine." His gaze swept the assembled crew. "Anyone who questions Lieutenant Hayes's honor questions my judgment. Is that understood?" Murmurs of assent spread through the crew, though Marsh's expression remained mutinous. "The boy needs discipline, Captain," he grumbled. "Ship's no place for a child. Then perhaps you should leave, as you seem determined to behave like one." Elias's hand moved to his sword hilt. "Unless you wish to challenge my authority directly." Marsh's courage withered under the captain's stare. "No, sir." "Timothy." Elias turned to the boy. "Come with me in the captain's cabin." Elias cleaned Timothy's bloodied face, while Clara watched silently from the doorway. "You can't fight every battle with your fists," Elias advised, applying a cloth to the boy's swollen nose. "You do," Timothy countered. "I choose my battles carefully." Elias set aside the cloth. "And I don't engage without advantage." He retrieved the guardian's knife from his pocket, offering it handle first to Timothy. "This was your father's. He wanted you to have it when you were ready." Timothy's eyes widened as he took the knife reverently. "This isn't a toy," Elias warned. "It's a symbol of protection and responsibility. Your father carried it as a reminder of his duty to guard what mattered most. His honor, his country, his family. And now it's mine," Timothy whispered. "If you're prepared to use it wisely." Elias glanced at Clara, seeking her approval. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I'll teach you how to handle it properly," Elias continued. "A blade is like a promise once drawn. It must serve its purpose." Timothy looked up, his young face suddenly serious. "Like your promise to father?" "Yes." Elias met the boy's gaze steadily. "Exactly like that." Later, As Timothy slept with the knife carefully wrapped beside his hammock, Clara sought out Elias on the quarterdeck. "Thank you," she said simply. He needed that connection to Jonathan. Elias nodded, his attention divided between her and the rival ship across the harbor. "Will you tell me now?" Clara asked. "What Redmond wants with us?" Elias's expression darkened. "Not what, Mrs. Hayes? Who?" His hand unconsciously moved to his sword hilt. "And I fear the answer is your son." The cottage stood empty, its sparse furnishings disturbed by searching hands. Two of Redmond's men methodically examined every inch of the Hayes' former lodging, while their captain observed with clinical detachment. "Nothing, Captain," reported the taller man, lifting the thin mattress for the second time. "Just the usual poverty." Redmond's gaze traveled the small space, missing nothing. Hayes was too clever for obvious hiding places. He tapped his walking stick against the uneven floorboards. "Check beneath the floor." The men exchanged glances before the shorter one produced a knife, working it between the boards. After several attempts, a narrow plank lifted, revealing a small cavity. "Well," Redmond prompted. The man reached in, extracting an oilskin-wrapped package. "Just papers, Captain." Redmond snatched the bundle, carefully unwrapping it. Inside lay a sealed letter and a weathered piece of parchment, its edges burned and incomplete. The pattern of ink revealed the unmistakable outline of an island, with cryptic markings indicating depths and bearings. "At last," Redmond breathed, examining the fragment. "Hayes, you secretive bastard. A treasure map, sir?" asked the taller man, eyes gleaming with avarice. "Of a sort." Redmond carefully refolded the parchment. "The companion to a piece I've sought for years." He broke the seal on the letter, scanning its contents with growing satisfaction. How predictable. He entrusted the truth to his wife. "The woman's aboard. The Tempest now," the shorter man reminded him. "Blackwood's protecting her and the boy. For now." Redmond tucked both items into his coat. "But even Blackwood's loyalty has its price." Aboard the Tempest, Clara's health continued its gradual improvement. The sea air, regular meals, and Wilson's treatments, the physician visited daily despite his fear of the pirate vessel, had restored some color to her cheeks. She sat in the captain's cabin, mending a torn sail as Elias reviewed navigational charts. "Timothy's becoming too comfortable here," she observed. "Yesterday he asked Fletcher if he could become a powder monkey." Elias suppressed a smile. "Fletcher would rather swallow gunpowder than let a child near it." "That isn't the point." Clara set aside her needle. "This ship is no place for him to grow up. We won't remain at anchor indefinitely." Elias conceded. "Redmond's presence forces a decision." "What decision?" Elias hesitated, then retrieved a small chest from beneath his bunk. The ornate box was fashioned from tropical hardwood with brass fittings, clearly valuable. From it, he withdrew a folded piece of parchment, similar to the one Redmond had discovered. "Jonathan gave me this for safekeeping," Elias explained, carefully unfolding the fragment. "It's why Redmond wants Timothy." Clara leaned forward, studying the partial map. "I don't understand. This is half of a chart leading to the wreck of the San Cristobal." Elias traced the incomplete coastline. "A Spanish galleon lost 50 years ago, carrying the treasury of Nueva Granada, and Timothy is connected to this how. Jonathan had the other half." Elias met her gaze. "He told me he'd hidden it where only his son could find it." Clara's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "The locket. I believe so. Jonathan was cryptic about its location, wanting to ensure only Timothy would inherit both pieces." Elias folded the map. "If Redmond knows about the locket, he's likely discovered Jonathan's half of the chart. So he wants my son to lead him to the other half." Clara's voice hardened. "And you, is that why you've helped us? For treasure?" Elias returned the fragment to its chest. "If I wanted only the map, I could have taken the locket at any time." Before Clara could respond, a knock interrupted them. Josiah entered, his expression troubled. "Captain, our men returned from checking Mrs. Hayes's cottage. Redmond's crew got there first. The place was thoroughly searched." Clara paled. "Did they find anything?" "Hard to say, ma'am." Josiah glanced at Elias. "But they left this." He held out a folded note, sealed with red wax bearing the imprint of a cracked skull. Elias broke the seal, reading aloud, "For the good of all, I propose a meeting. Neutral ground, the governor's garden. Midnight." He crumpled the paper, signed with Redmond's mark. "You can't seriously consider meeting him," Clara protested. "I can't seriously consider ignoring him." Elias turned to Josiah. "Double the watch. No one leaves or boards without my express permission." After Josiah departed, Clara moved to the small window overlooking the harbor. "Jonathan warned me this might happen." "What might happen?" "Men fighting over his legacy." She touched the broken locket at her throat. "The night before his last voyage, he made me promise to keep this safe for Timothy. Said it contained more than just our portraits." "Did he tell you how to open it?" Clara shook her head. "Only that when the time came, Timothy would know." She turned back to Elias. "Jonathan trusted you with half the map. Why not the whole thing?" He said, "Treasure has a way of turning friends into enemies." Elias's expression darkened. He wanted to ensure neither of us could claim it alone. "And now Redmond threatens everything, you, Timothy." Elias's decision crystallized. "We set sail tomorrow before Redmond can move against us." "To where?" "A safe harbor where we can determine our next move." Elias gathered his charts. "I need to speak with Timothy about the locket." Clara caught his arm. "Whatever Jonathan hid, it's caused enough death already. Perhaps it should remain lost. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, Mrs. Hayes." Elias gently removed her hand. "We can only choose how we confront them." Midnight found Elias alone in the governor's garden, a neutral territory in Port Royal, where even pirates could meet without fear of immediate arrest. The moonlight cast distorted shadows through exotic foliage imported from across the empire, creating a labyrinth of light and dark. Punctual as always, Blackwood. Redmond emerged from behind a towering palm, dressed in his customary understated elegance. An admirable quality in a pirate. "State your business," Elias replied coldly. His hand remained near his sword hilt, though both captains understood that drawing weapons here would bring the full force of the garrison down upon them. Redmond produced a small pouch, emptying its contents into his palm. Two simple gold bands gleamed in the moonlight. "Wedding rings, Blackwood. Practical protection for our mutual interests." "Explain yourself." "The Hayes boy has something we both want." Redmond rolled the rings between his fingers. "The missing half of the San Cristobal chart." "You assume I care about treasure." "I assume you care about honor," Redmond countered. "Jonathan Hayes entrusted you with half a map and his family's welfare. An interesting combination of responsibilities." Elias remained silent, waiting for Redmond to reveal his true purpose. "I propose a temporary alliance," Redmond continued. "You've clearly developed a rapport with the widow and her son. Marry her, provide legitimate protection that even the authorities must respect. Then we combine our charts and share the treasure equally. And I should trust you because of your sterling reputation." Redmond's laugh was surprisingly genuine. "Trust has nothing to do with it. Self-interest governs us both. The San Cristobal's treasure is too vast for one ship to carry. We need each other." "You need me," Elias corrected. "I have the boy's trust and half the map. What do I need from you?" "Protection from the Royal Navy." Redmond's smile vanished. 3 warships arrive next week to clean up Port Royal. Your name tops their list of targets." Elias concealed his surprise. Redmond's intelligence network had always been impressive. "And you know this how?" "I have friends in diplomatic circles." Redmond tossed one of the rings to Elias, who caught it reflexively. "Consider my offer. Marriage to the widow gives you legitimate reason to have her and the boy aboard. It also provides a respectable explanation for leaving port with them. Clara Hayes would never agree. Women in desperate circumstances make pragmatic choices. Redmond pocketed the second ring. Especially mother. Dawn was breaking when Elias returned to the Tempest, his mind heavy with Redmond's proposal. He found Clara on deck, watching the sunrise with Timothy. "You met with him," she stated, noting Elias's expression. "It wasn't a question." "Below deck," Elias replied, nodding toward his cabin. "We need to talk." Once alone, Elias relayed Redmond's information about the approaching naval vessels, though he omitted the wedding ring and marriage proposal. "We must leave immediately," Clara concluded, her face pale. "If they discover Timothy aboard a pirate vessel, they'll assume he's been kidnapped," Elias finished. "Along with you, so we're trapped." Redmond waiting in port, warships approaching. Clara paced the small cabin. What did he really want? Elias. "Not just to warn you about the Navy." Elias hesitated, then produced the gold band. "He suggested a solution that would legitimize your presence aboard." Clara stared at the ring, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Marriage. A practical arrangement," Elias clarified quickly. "Nothing more. A pirate solution." Her voice held no judgment, merely contemplation. Jonathan would find it grimly amusing. "You're under no obligation to consider it." "Aren't I?" Clara's gaze was direct. "My options are limited, Captain. I cannot return to shore while Redmond's men search for us. I cannot remain aboard as your guest when warships arrive. There are other ports, where a widow with consumption and a young son would fare. How exactly?" She took the ring, examining it in the lantern light. "What would this arrangement entail?" "Protection under maritime law. My name would shield both you and Timothy from immediate suspicion." Elias chose his words carefully. "No other obligations would be expected." Clara studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. "And the map, is that part of this arrangement?" Jonathan wanted both pieces united only when Timothy was ready. Elias met her gaze steadily. "I intend to honor that wish." A knock interrupted them. Josiah entered, looking uncomfortable. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but the boy is asking questions." The crew's starting to talk. Later that day, the ship's chaplain, a former priest who'd found rum and piracy more compelling than his vows, stood on the main deck. The crew gathered in uneasy witness as Clara and Elias exchanged the simple bands in a ceremony as brief as it was surreal. "By the power vested in me by..." The chaplain paused, momentarily confused about his authority. "By the sea that binds us all, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss sealed the union, merely a formal handshake that transformed them from reluctant allies to legal spouses. Timothy watched with conflicting emotions, hope warring with uncertainty on his young face. As the crew dispersed, many grumbling about the impropriety of a woman aboard permanently, Josiah approached with news that Redmond's ship had weighed anchor. "The Crimson Serpent is making preparations to sail," he reported. "Looks like your wedding has forced his hand, Captain, or played directly into it," Elias replied, watching the rival ship's activity with growing unease. "Have the men prepared to sail with the evening tide. We've lingered in Port Royal long enough." Across the harbor, Redmond observed the Tempest through his spyglass, a satisfied smile playing across his scarred lips. "Like pieces on a chessboard," he murmured to his first mate. "Moving precisely where I intend them to go." Timothy stood at the bow of the Tempest, marveling as the ship cut through the waves with purpose and grace. 3 days had passed since their departure from Port Royal. 3 days of open water and relative peace. The boy had adapted to ship life with alarming ease, his sea legs proving steadier than many veteran sailors during yesterday's squall. "Watch the horizon, not the waves," Elias instructed, joining him at the rail. "The sea will hypnotize you if you let it." "Is that why sailors fall overboard?" Timothy asked, shifting his gaze as directed. "Some." Elias handed him a small object wrapped in oilskin. "This is for you." Timothy unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a pearlescent seashell, unlike any he'd seen before. Its spiral chamber was lined with a material that shifted colors in the light, from deep blue to violet to a warning crimson. A storm shell, Elias explained. Rare even among seafarers. It changes color when pressure drops, warning of approaching storms before most sailors can sense them. Timothy turned the shell with reverence. It's beautiful. It's practical, Elias corrected, though a hint of softness touched his voice. Your father carried it on every voyage, said it saved his ship more than once. Was this from the San Cristobal too? Timothy asked innocently. Elias stiffened slightly. What do you know of that name? I heard you and Mother talking. Timothy's directness was reminiscent of his father. About the map and the treasure. Before Elias could respond, Clara approached, her steps steadier than they'd been in Port Royal. The sea air had continued to strengthen her, though the consumption still shadowed her eyes with fatigue after minimal exertion. Teaching him piracy already? She asked, her tone lighter than her words suggested. Navigation, Elias corrected. Essential knowledge for any man of the sea. Clara examined the shell in Timothy's hands. Jonathan's storm predictor. I wondered what happened to it. Captain Blackwood. Timothy caught himself. Father says it warns of danger before it arrives. The slip didn't go unnoticed by either ad. Since the hasty wedding ceremony, Timothy had begun testing the word father when referring to Elias, gauging reactions. Clara's expression tightened imperceptibly while Elias maintained his usual stoic demeanor. Your father was right, Clara said carefully, about many things. A call from the crow's nest interrupted them. Sail, northwest bearing. Elias immediately pulled out his spyglass, training it on the distant horizon. His expression darkened. The crimson serpent. Redmond followed us. Clara instinctively moved closer to Timothy. As expected, Elias collapsed the spyglass. Though he's kept his distance these 3 days, why show himself now? Because we're approaching the windward passage. Elias's voice took on the commanding tone he used with his crew. Timothy, go below deck. Find Fletcher and stay with him. The boy hesitated, clutching the storm shell. But now, Timothy. Clara's tone brooked no argument. Once the boy had gone, Elias led Clara to the quarterdeck where they could speak privately. Redmond will make his move soon. The passage is narrow enough to force an engagement if he wishes it. Can we outrun him? The tempest is faster with a favorable wind. Elias studied the darkening clouds gathering on the western horizon. But we may have greater concerns shortly. Clara followed his gaze, understanding immediately. A storm, a significant one, judging by those cloud formations. Elias unconsciously touched the wedding band on his finger, a habit he'd developed over the past days. We need to decide our course now. East toward Hispaniola offers shelter, but would corner us if Redmond attacks. Continuing north keeps us in open water, but at the storm's mercy. What would you choose if we weren't aboard? Clara asked. I'd engage Redmond directly and settle this. The blunt admission surprised even Elias. Below deck, Timothy had ignored the order to find Fletcher. Instead, he'd slipped into the small space he now shared with his mother, retrieving the guardian's knife and the broken locket. The shell in his hand had turned a deep crimson, a warning that made his heart race. Footsteps approached, and he quickly tucked the items into his pocket. Josiah appeared in the doorway. There you are, boy. Captain wants all hands prepared for rough weather. He eyed Timothy suspiciously. What are you doing? The shell turned red, Timothy explained, showing Josiah. That means danger, doesn't it? The first mate's expression softened slightly. Aye, it does. Come along then. As they made their way through the ship, crewmen were securing loose items and preparing for heavy seas. Timothy noticed some giving him dark looks, their resentment of his presence still evident, despite the captain's marriage to his mother. On deck, Elias was issuing rapid commands while Clara stood nearby, her face pale but determined. When she spotted Timothy, relief washed over her features. I told you to stay with Fletcher, she scolded, pulling him close. The shell warned me, Timothy explained, showing her the crimson coloration. Just like Father said it would. This time Clara didn't correct his use of father. Instead, she looked to Elias, who was studying the Crimson Serpent. To his spyglass again. He's changing course, Elias announced grimly. Moving to intercept us before the storm hits. Can we evade him? Clara asked. Not without sailing directly into the worst of the weather. Elias lowered the spyglass. He's forcing our hand. A crack of thunder emphasized his words, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The storm and their enemy approached simultaneously, leaving no easy escape. What now? Clara asked, holding Timothy tightly against the strengthening wind. Elias looked at them both, his decision made. We fight, on our terms, not his. The storm raged through the night, lightning transforming the darkness into brief moments of stark illumination. The tempest lived up to her name, riding massive swells that would have capsized lesser vessels. Through skill and fortune, Elias had navigated away from direct confrontation with Redmond, using the storm's fury as both shield and weapon. By dawn, the tempest had blown itself out, leaving behind a grey, sullen sea. Clara emerged from below deck where she had sheltered with Timothy, finding Elias at the helm, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. We lost sight of Redmond shortly before midnight, he informed her, relinquishing the wheel to Josiah. Either the storm separated us, or he withdrew deliberately. Is that good news or bad? Clara asked, her voice hoarse from the lingering effects of her illness, exacerbated by the damp conditions. Uncertain, Elias led her to his cabin, where a detailed chart lay open on the table. Unlike standard naval maps, this one contained markings and annotations unique to pirate navigation, hidden coves, unmarked shoals, and safe harbors unknown to official authorities. These are remarkable, Clara observed, studying the intricate details, more comprehensive than any naval charts Jonathan showed me. Pirates share knowledge selectively. Elias traced a route with his finger. We're here, approximately. The storm drove us northeast, away from our intended course. Where were we heading? Bermuda initially, from there to Carolina. Elias straightened, wincing slightly from the strain of fighting the wheel all night. Ports where my reputation might afford us some protection while we determine our next move. Clara studied him with newfound respect. The man who had stood unflinching against both storm and enemy for hours looked exhausted, but undefeated. She found herself unconsciously touching the wedding band on her finger. Thank you, she said simply, for keeping us safe. Elias acknowledged her gratitude with a nod, uncomfortable with the softening between them. Given our position, I propose a change of course. There's a place not marked on any official chart, a refuge known only to certain captains, a pirate haven, of sorts, more a neutral territory where various enterprises can be conducted without interference. Elias indicated a small archipelago on the chart. It's called Shipwreck Cove. Timothy burst into the cabin then, face flushed with excitement. Fletcher says I'm the best luck charm he's ever sailed with. He says no ship survives a storm like that without special fortune. Clara smiled at her son's enthusiasm, noting how the adventure had transformed him from a careworn child into a boy again. Did you thank the captain for his skillful navigation? Timothy turned to Elias with unabashed admiration. Fletcher says even the sea respects you, that it parted just enough to let us through while swallowing Redmond whole. Fletcher exaggerates, Elias replied, though Clara detected a hint of pleased pride in his voice. And Redmond is far from swallowed. A captain of his experience wouldn't be defeated by a single storm. Then we'll face him again, Timothy asked, disappointment evident. Inevitably, Elias returned to the chart. Which is why we make for Shipwreck Cove. We'll resupply and gather information. The boy peered at the map with intense interest. Is there treasure there? Timothy, Clara admonished. Information is the most valuable treasure in these waters, Elias answered seriously. More precious than gold. By midday, the weather had cleared enough to reveal their altered circumstance. The storm had driven them into waters filled with small, unnamed islands, a labyrinthine seascape where navigation required intimate knowledge of channels and currents. Elias stood on the quarterdeck with Timothy beside him, teaching the boy to read the water's surface for signs of hidden reefs. The lighter blue indicates shallow water, he explained. See how it changes color ahead? That marks a channel between those two islands. Timothy nodded eagerly, absorbing the lesson with remarkable aptitude. Clara watched from nearby, her sewing forgotten in her lap. The scene stirred conflicting emotions, appreciation for Elias's patient instruction mixed with unease at her son's growing attachment to the pirate captain. He's a natural seaman, Josiah commented, pausing beside her. Has his father's eye for navigation. Which father do you mean? Clara asked quietly. Josiah glanced at her sharply, then softened. Both, perhaps. Lieutenant Hayes was one of the finest navigators I've sailed with, but the captain, he gestured toward Elias and Timothy. He sees things in water most men miss entirely. By sunset, the Tempest had negotiated the treacherous channels and anchored in a protected lagoon bordered by dense mangroves. The crew, exhausted from battling the storm, set about making repairs while Elias consulted with Josiah about their exact position. Clara found herself unexpectedly useful, organizing the distribution of supplies and treating minor injuries sustained during the tempest. Her capable management earned grudging respect from crewmen who had previously viewed her as an unwelcome burden. As night fell, Elias joined Clara and Timothy for a simple meal in his cabin, a domestic arrangement that had gradually evolved without formal discussion. The awkwardness of their initial forced proximity had given way to a tentative routine. We'll reach Shipwreck Cove by tomorrow evening if the wind holds, Elias informed them, breaking a hard biscuit into his stew. You should both remain aboard when we arrive. The cove welcomes few women and children even less. I want to see it, Timothy protested. Perhaps later, Elias conceded, surprising Clara with his flexibility. After I've secured our position, Clara raised an eyebrow. Or your reputation. A rare smile touched Elias's lips. In the cove, they're one and the same. He hesitated, then added, the marriage will help. Pirates respect certain traditions, however unconventional our arrangement. Clara met his gaze steadily. Is that all it is to you? An arrangement? Timothy looked between them, suddenly alert to the undercurrents in their conversation. Before Elias could answer, a shout from the deck shattered the moment. Sail! Coming fast around the southern point. All three rushed to the cabin window. In the fading light, a ship flying no colors rounded the island, heading directly for their anchorage. Redmond? Clara asked, dread evident in her voice. Elias shook his head, his expression grim. Worse, that's the Phantom, a privateer who hunts pirates for Spanish gold. He reached for his sword, and she's found us in a perfect trap. The privateer vessel prowled the entrance to the lagoon like a predator assessing its prey. Through his spyglass, Elias studied the Phantom with growing concern. Her gun ports remained closed, unusual for a ship preparing to attack. 15 guns at least, Josiah muttered beside him, and the wind favors them. They're not moving to engage, Elias observed. They're blocking our exit. Waiting for dawn, perhaps. Better visibility for cannon fire. Elias lowered the spyglass. Or waiting for someone else. Realization dawned on Josiah's weathered face. Redmond, a coordinated trap would explain how the Phantom found us in these waters. Elias scanned his crew working frantically to prepare for battle. Or we have a traitor aboard. Impossible, Josiah protested. The men have their complaints, but betrayal. Gold loosens many loyalties, Elias cut him off. Have Fletcher prepare the longboat. If we can't break free by morning, Clara and Timothy will need an alternate escape. Below deck, Clara helped Timothy gather their few possessions, her movements calm despite the fear evident in her eyes. Will we fight them? Timothy asked, clutching his guardian's knife. The captain will decide the best course. Clara answered carefully. Our job is to be prepared for anything. A soft knock preceded Fletcher's entrance. Captain's compliments, ma'am. He asks that you join him in his cabin immediately. In the captain's quarters, Elias stood with Marsh, the sailor who had previously fought with Timothy. Between them on the table sat a silver cup, its contents untouched. Close the door, Elias ordered, when Clara entered. His voice held a dangerous edge she'd never heard before. What's happened? She asked, noting the tension in the room. Tell her, Marsh. Elias's hand rested on his pistol. The burly sailor swallowed visibly. The cook found this in my sea chest, ma'am. I swear I never seen it before. Elias nudged the cup toward Clara. Smell it. She detected the bitter almond scent immediately. Poison, meant for me according to a note found with it. Elias's gaze never left Marsh. Written in a hand similar to messages the Phantom has used to communicate with informants in the past. I'm being set up, Marsh protested. I've sailed with you 8 years, Captain, and complained about my decisions for most of them. Elias circled the table, particularly my choice to protect Mrs. Hayes and her son. Grumbling ain't betrayal. Clara studied the sailor's face, noting genuine fear beneath his belligerence. Captain, she said quietly, may I ask a question? At Elias's nod, she addressed Marsh directly. If you wish to poison the captain, why keep the cup in your sea chest rather than use it? Exactly my point. Marsh seized on her logic. I'm not clever, but I ain't that stupid. A commotion outside interrupted them. Josiah burst in, dragging a struggling cabin boy. Found him searching your navigation chest, Captain. Had this on him. He held up a small key. Elias recognized it instantly. The key to my private compartment where I keep the map fragment. The boy ceased struggling, his young face contorting with contempt. You weren't supposed to check the chest until morning, he spat at Marsh. You great fool. Understanding dawned on Elias. The cup was a diversion. You planted it to focus suspicion on Marsh while you stole the map. Redmond pays better than you, the boy replied defiantly, and he doesn't burden his ship with women and children. Elias moved with frightening speed, pinning the boy against the wall. How long have you been his spy? Since Port Royal, the boy gasped. He approached me the night before we sailed. And the Phantom? How did they find us? Signal fire. The boy's defiance returned. While everyone fought the storm, I lit a beacon on the stern, showed them our position. Elias released him abruptly, disgust evident in his expression. What did Redmond promise you? A proper share of the San Cristobal treasure. The boy's gaze shifted to Clara, and he said the locket is the key to finding it. Clara instinctively touched the broken locket at her throat. My husband's memento. Your husband's secret. The boy laughed bitterly. Everyone knows Lieutenant Hayes didn't die of fever. He was killed for that locket and what it contains. The cabin fell silent at this revelation. Elias finally broke the tension, addressing Josiah. Secure them both in the hold until we determine who else might be compromised. After the prisoners were removed, Clara confronted Elias. Is it true? About Jonathan? I don't, he admitted. The letter I received mentioned fever, but Jonathan had enemies beyond Redmond, men who would kill for the promise of treasure. A sudden crash above deck interrupted them. Timothy burst into the cabin, his face pale, boats coming from the Phantom. Elias was moving before the boy finished speaking, calling orders as he headed for the deck. Clara and Timothy followed, emerging into chaos as the crew prepared to repel boarders. Through the darkness they could see longboats approaching from the privateer vessel, loaded with armed men. Get below, Elias commanded, drawing his sword. No, Clara replied firmly. We won't hide while men die protecting us. Before Elias could argue, the first grappling hooks caught the railing. The battle erupted with shocking violence, pistol shots, clashing steel, and the grunts of men engaged in desperate combat. Clara pulled Timothy behind a cannon, her eyes scanning for a weapon. Finding a fallen boarding axe, she seized it, determined to defend her son if necessary. The fighting surged across the deck. Elias moved through the chaos with lethal precision, his blade finding targets with practiced efficiency. Clara watched in horrified fascination, seeing for the first time the pirate captain who had earned his fearsome reputation. Suddenly, Timothy cried out. A privateer had spotted them and was advancing, cutlass raised. Clara swung the axe awkwardly, forcing him back. The man laughed, easily parrying her next attempt. "The captain's woman," he sneered. "Redmond will pay extra for you." As he lunged forward, Clara stumbled backward. The privateer raised his blade for a killing stroke, only to howl in pain as Timothy drove his guardian's knife deep into the man's thigh. The distraction gave Clara time to regain her footing and swing the axe again, this time connecting solid across the deck. Elias dispatched another attacker, then turned to see Clara standing protectively over Timothy, blood-spattered axe in hand. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual recognition, not as reluctant allies, but as partners in survival. The remaining privateers, facing unexpectedly fierce resistance, retreated to their boats. As they withdrew, Elias made his way to Clara and Timothy. "Are you hurt?" he asked, genuine concern, replacing his usual stoicism. "No," Clara answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thanks to Timothy." The boy stood straighter at her acknowledgement, still gripping his bloodied knife. Elias surveyed the aftermath, wounded crewmen, damaged rigging, but the ship and most of her crew intact. "We need to sail immediately, before they regroup or the Phantom decides to use her cannons." "And Marsh, the cabin boy?" Clara asked. "We can't risk keeping traitors aboard, willing or coerced." Elias's expression was grim but not merciless. "They'll be marooned on the small island to the west. The Phantom will likely retrieve them." Clara nodded, understanding the relative mercy in his decision. As preparations to sail began, she studied the man who had become her husband in name. The cold-eyed pirate and the protective guardian were two sides of the same complex individual, a man more like Jonathan than she had initially been willing to admit. Shipwreck Cove lived up to its name, a natural harbor where the skeletal remains of dozens of vessels formed an eerie protective barrier around a thriving community of outcasts. The Tempest navigated the narrow entrance with practiced precision, drawing curious glances from the motley inhabitants watching from ramshackle structures built upon and between shipwrecks. Elias stood at the helm, his face impassive despite the pain from a wound sustained during the battle with the privateers. Clara had stitched the gash along his ribs herself, her touch clinical but gentle. "Keep your hood up," he instructed Clara, as they prepared to disembark, "and Timothy stays between us at all times." The boy nodded solemnly, still subdued from the violence he'd witnessed and participated in 2 nights before. The guardian's knife remained tucked in his belt, a weight far heavier than its physical presence. "Who are we meeting?" Clara asked, adjusting the rough cloak Elias had provided, an old acquaintance with connections in Nassau, Port Royal, and Havana. Elias secured his weapons. "If anyone knows Redmond's larger game, it's Madame Lev." They moved through the chaotic settlement, a place where nationality and origin meant less than one's skills and connections. Elias guided them past taverns overflowing with raucous laughter, markets selling plunder from across the known world, and shadowy alleyways where whispered deals shaped the fate of nations. Madame Levesque's establishment stood apart, a relatively intact merchant vessel permanently docked at the cove's inner harbor. Its exterior retained the dignified appearance of its trading days, a stark contrast to the flamboyant derelicts surrounding it. "Wait here," Elias instructed when they reached the gangplank. A well-dressed doorman blocked their path. "Captain Blackwood," the man acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Madame has been expecting you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Has she indeed?" News travels swiftly, even in uncharted waters. The doorman's gaze shifted to Clara and Timothy. "Your family is welcome as well." The interior of the ship had been transformed into an elegant salon, where pirates, merchants, and occasionally naval officers exchanged information over fine wines and careful conversation. At its center sat Madame Levesque, a striking woman whose ageless beauty masked a razor-sharp intelligence. "Elias," she greeted warmly, rising to embrace him with European formality. "It has been too long." "Josephine." He returned the gesture with unexpected ease. "You're looking well, and you've acquired a wife and child." Her perceptive eyes examined Clara and Timothy. How unexpected. Clara met the woman's assessing gaze with quiet dignity. "Recent developments, madame." "So I've heard." Josephine gestured toward a private alcove, screened by silk curtains. "Please, join me. We have much to discuss." Once seated with refreshments provided, Josephine produced a sealed document bearing an official wax impression. "This arrived for you last week. I thought it prudent to hold it rather than forward it to Port Royal." Elias broke the seal, examining the document with growing surprise. "A governor's pardon. Conditional, of course." Josephine sipped her wine. "Governor Preston of Carolina has heard rumors of the San Cristobal chart. He offers legitimate protection in exchange for—" "How did Preston know about the chart?" Elias asked sharply. "The same way I knew about your marriage." Josephine smiled cryptically. Nothing valuable remains secret for long. Her attention shifted to Clara, especially when it involves Admiral Hamilton's daughter. Clara's teacup clattered against its saucer. "How did you?" "Your father and I have a complex history," Josephine replied. "When I heard Lieutenant Hayes had married George Hamilton's estranged daughter, I made it my business to know the details." Timothy looked at his mother in confusion. "Admiral Hamilton is your father. You never told me." "There was nothing to tell," Clara said stiffly. "He disowned me when I married your father." "A naval officer marrying beneath her station," Josephine explained to Timothy. "The scandal nearly ended Jonathan's career before it began." "That's enough," Elias interrupted, noting Clara's discomfort. "We didn't come to discuss family history, didn't you?" Josephine challenged. "The Admiral is currently stationed in Nassau, commanding the West Indies fleet. His influence could provide protection beyond anything Governor Preston offers." Clara's face had gone pale. "My father would never help us, perhaps not you," Josephine conceded. "But his grandson, blood, has persuasive properties, especially as men age and contemplate their legacies." Timothy straightened. "I could meet my grandfather." "No," Clara said sharply. "He made his choice years ago." Elias studied the pardon document thoughtfully. "What else do you know, Josephine?" "About Redmond, the Phantom, the chart." "Redmond has formed an alliance with Captain Vargas of the Phantom. Unusual for him to share potential profits." Josephine leaned forward conspiratorially. "More interesting is why they believe the San Cristobal's treasure worth such cooperation." "The usual reasons," Elias suggested. "Gold, silver, jewels, something more valuable." Josephine lowered her voice. "Documents proving Spain has been secretly funding rebellions in British colonies. Information worth far more than gold to the right buyer." Clara's breath caught. "That's why Jonathan was assigned to find the wreck. Not for treasure, but for intelligence." "And why he entrusted half the chart to Elias," Josephine concluded. "He needed someone outside naval hierarchy, someone Spain wouldn't suspect." Elias sat back, processing this revelation. "Does Admiral Hamilton know this connection, that his son-in-law was working with me?" "Doubtful." Josephine's gaze shifted to Clara. "Which makes your reunion potentially advantageous. The Admiral gains a grandson and critical intelligence. You gain protection and legitimacy." "At the cost of my pride," Clara countered. "Pride is poor currency in these waters," Josephine replied evenly, "especially when measured against your son's future." Later, as they returned to the Tempest, Clara remained silent, her thoughts clearly troubled. Timothy walked between them, excitement about a previously unknown grandfather warring with concern for his mother. "We don't have to pursue this," Elias offered once they were aboard. Clara turned to him, her expression resolute. If approaching my father provides Timothy security, then my pride is a small sacrifice. And the locket? Elias asked quietly. Jonathan hid something inside it, something worth killing for. Clara touched the broken keepsake at her throat. Then it's time we discovered exactly what my husband entrusted to us. Her gaze met Elias's directly. Both husbands. Coral Bay shimmered under the midday sun, its crystal waters revealing kaleidoscopic reefs beneath the surface. This neutral port on a small, unclaimed island had long served as meeting ground for negotiations too delicate for official channels. The pristine natural harbour currently hosted 3 vessels, the Tempest, a British naval frigate flying an admiral's pennant, and at a cautious distance, the Crimson Serpent. Elias stood on the deck of his ship, watching as a longboat approached from the naval vessel. Beside him, Clara fidgeted with her borrowed dress, the finest Madame Levesque could provide on short notice, though still modest compared to what an admiral's daughter might once have worn. Remember, Elias cautioned, we reveal nothing about the chart until we gauge his reaction to Timothy. Clara nodded, her face a mask of composure that failed to hide her anxiety. It's been 9 years since I last saw him, and he's about to meet his grandson for the first time. Elias placed an admiring hand on her shoulder. Even admirals are human, Clara. Timothy emerged from below deck, uncomfortably neat in clean clothes, his usual exuberance subdued by the gravity of the occasion. He clutched a white parley flag, the universal symbol for truce negotiations, which Elias had entrusted to him as an important responsibility. Remember what we practiced? Clara knelt to straighten his collar. Address him as Admiral, or Sir, not Grandfather, at least not immediately. I know, Mother. Timothy's voice carried a maturity beyond his years. I won't disappoint you. The longboat docked alongside the Tempest, and Admiral George Hamilton ascended with the rigid posture of a man accustomed to command. In his 60s he remained impressive, his uniform immaculate, his bearing regal despite the slight stoop of advancing age. His eyes, the same shade as Clara's, surveyed the pirate vessel with thinly veiled distaste. Captain Blackwood. His voice carried the cultivated accent of England's upper classes. I expected our meeting to occur on neutral ground, not aboard your ship. A courtesy, Admiral, Elias replied evenly, so your daughter wouldn't have to board a naval vessel while her health remains delicate. Hamilton's gaze shifted to Clara, his expression betraying a flicker of emotion quickly suppressed. Clara, father, she cursed slightly, a gesture that seemed to unsettle the Admiral more than defiance would have. Timothy stepped forward, executing a perfect bow while holding the parley flag. Admiral Hamilton, sir. I'm Timothy Hayes. It's an honor to meet you. The old man froze, staring at the boy as though seeing a ghost. Good God, he whispered. You're the image of your father at that age. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Elias. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in my cabin, away from curious eyes. He nodded toward the Crimson Serpent, where Redmond could be seen observing their meeting through a spyglass. Inside the captain's cabin, Admiral Hamilton maintained his rigid posture, despite the gentle rocking of the ship. He had accepted a glass of Madeira, but left it untouched, his attention fixed on Timothy. Jonathan wrote to me of your birth, he said abruptly. I never responded. Because of me, Clara interjected. Because of my pride, Hamilton corrected, surprising them all, a failing that has cost me dearly over the years. Elias leaned against his desk, deliberately casual to offset the Admiral's formality. Your daughter has shown considerable courage these past weeks, Admiral, as has your grandson. Hamilton's gaze sharpened. Yes, this peculiar arrangement. My daughter supposedly married to the notorious Captain Blackwood. His tone made clear his skepticism. A marriage of necessity, Clara explained. For Timothy's protection. From what threat exactly? Hamilton demanded. What involvement did Jonathan have with pirates that now endangers his son? The moment of truth had arrived. Elias nodded to Clara, who carefully removed the broken locket from around her neck and placed it on the table, Jonathan was tracking the wreck of the San Cristobal, she explained, not for its gold, but for documents it carried, papers proving Spain's involvement in colonial insurrections. Hamilton's face betrayed nothing, but his hand tightened perceptibly on his untouched glass. That mission was classified. How would you know of it? Because Jonathan told me before his last voyage. Clara met her father's gaze directly. He said if anything happened to him, I was to find Captain Blackwood and show him this locket. Blackwood? Hamilton turned to Elias, with renewed suspicion. What connection did my son-in-law have with a pirate? Before Elias could answer, a tremendous explosion rocked the harbor. All four rushed to the cabin windows to see smoke billowing from the naval frigate's midsection. My ship, Hamilton exclaimed, as a second explosion tore through the vessel's stern. On the horizon, the Phantom had appeared, her gun ports open and smoking from the Crimson Serpent. Longboats were rapidly deploying, filled with armed men heading toward both the stricken naval vessel and the Tempest. We're under attack, Elias stated grimly, already moving toward the door. Redmond must have allied with Vargas. My men, Hamilton protested, following close behind. On deck, chaos had erupted. The Tempest's crew scrambled to battle stations, while Josiah bellowed orders. The naval frigate was listing badly, sailors abandoning ship as flames consumed the wooden structure. Get the Admiral's men aboard, Elias commanded. We'll need every hand. Hamilton stared at him in surprise. You'd rescue naval officers. I'd rescue any man facing Redmond and Vargas together, Elias replied tersely. Clara hustled Timothy toward the relative safety of the captain's cabin, but the boy broke free, running instead to help a wounded sailor struggling aboard from a rescue boat. Timothy, Clara cried as cannon fire from the Phantom splashed dangerously close to the Tempest. Elias was already moving, catching the boy and the injured sailor both as another explosion rocked the harbor. Chunks of burning debris from the naval frigate rained down around them. Stay with your mother, Elias ordered, thrusting Timothy toward Clara. The boy's response was lost in the din of battle, as Redmond's longboats reached the Tempest's hull. Grappling hooks flew over the railings as pirates began to climb aboard. Admiral Hamilton had drawn his sword, his age seemingly forgotten, as he directed his surviving officers with practiced command. Defend the starboard quarter. Don't let them establish a foothold. For a surreal moment, a pirate captain and a British admiral stood shoulder to shoulder, united against a common enemy. Then Timothy's scream cut through the cacophony of battle. Clara had collapsed on the deck, blood spreading across her bodice from a splinter wound caused by splintered wood from a near-miss cannonball. Timothy knelt beside her, his face pale with terror. As Elias and Hamilton both turned toward the fallen woman, a familiar figure swung aboard from one of the attacking longboats. Captain Redmond, sword drawn, his calculating eyes fixed not on Elias or Hamilton, but on Timothy and the broken locket still clutched in Clara's hand. Timothy awakened to darkness and the nauseating sway of a ship under full sail. His head throbbed where Redmond's men had struck him. The last thing he remembered was his mother collapsing, blood spreading across her dress, and Redmond lunging toward them through the chaos of battle. He tried to move, discovering his hands bound behind his back. The space reeked of bilge water and unwashed bodies. The Crimson Serpent's hold. Rough wood pressed against his cheek as the ship pitched through heavy seas. Finally awake, young Hayes. Redmond's cultured voice emerged from the shadows. A lantern flared, revealing the captain seated on a barrel, studying Timothy with clinical interest. "Where's my mother?" Timothy demanded, struggling to sit upright. "And Captain Blackwood?" "Your mother was alive when we departed," Redmond answered, with uncomfortable precision. As for Blackwood, he was somewhat occupied with defending what remained of his ship. The Phantom's cannons are remarkably effective. Timothy felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the ship's motion. "Why am I here? Direct, like your father." Redmond produced a small brass key, twirling it between his fingers. "This opens my private cabin, where I've placed your mother's locket for safekeeping. I believe you know its importance." "It's just a keepsake," Timothy lied, remembering Elias's warnings about revealing too much. Redmond's laugh held no humor. "A keepsake that Jonathan Hayes guarded with his life, that Blackwood spent 30 nights waiting to find, that your mother never removes." He leaned closer. "Children are poor liars, Timothy. Your eyes betray everything." Timothy remained silent, focusing instead on his surroundings. The hold contained various crates and barrels, some canvas-covered shapes that might be additional cargo or hiding places. A single guard stood near the ladder leading to the upper deck. "Your father was an honorable man," Redmond continued conversationally. "Too honorable for the task assigned to him. Did you know he refused to torture a Spanish captain for information about the San Cristobal, even when ordered directly by your grandfather, Admiral Hamilton?" Timothy's surprise must have shown because Redmond smiled coldly. "Oh yes, the Admiral was deeply involved in the search for those documents. State secrets can be terribly valuable commodities." "You're lying," Timothy said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Am I?" Redmond pocketed the brass key. "Ask yourself why a decorated naval officer would trust a pirate like Blackwood with half a treasure map. Why your mother, daughter of an admiral, would marry a common lieutenant against her father's wishes." He paused significantly. "Nothing in this story is quite what it seems, boy." Timothy's mind raced, recalling fragments of overheard conversations between Elias and his mother. The growing trust between them, the tension when his grandfather appeared. "I'll make you an offer," Redmond continued. "Tell me how to open the locket, and I'll release you at our next port. You could start fresh, perhaps even return to England for proper schooling, something your mother surely wanted for you. And if I refuse, then you'll remain my guest until the locket reveals its secrets through other means." Redmond stood. "I'm not an unreasonable man, Timothy. Unlike some, I don't harm children for advantage." With that thinly veiled reference to Elias, Redmond departed, taking the lantern but leaving the guard posted at the ladder. In the darkness, Timothy tested his bonds. The rope securing his wrists had been tied hastily during the battle, with just enough slack that he might work his hands free given time. More pressing was determining his exact situation. How long had he been unconscious? How far had the Crimson Serpent traveled? Was anyone pursuing them? Hours passed as Timothy worked methodically at his bindings. When his wrists were raw and bleeding but marginally looser, he changed tactics. His captors had taken his guardian's knife, but overlooked the storm shell still tucked inside his shirt. Its edge wasn't sharp, but its spiral shape provided an irregular surface against which he could gradually fray the rope. The guard changed twice before Timothy's patience yielded results. With a final painful twist, his hands came free. He remained motionless, controlling his breathing as he considered his next move. The brass key hung from a hook near the captain's cabin, Redmond's deliberate taunt. The locket itself would be inside, likely in a secure location. Timothy had no illusions about overpowering armed pirates, but perhaps stealth and timing might offer an opportunity. A sudden commotion above deck drew the guard's attention. Orders were shouted, followed by the distinctive thunder of cannon fire, not from the Crimson Serpent, but directed at it. The ship lurched violently, throwing Timothy against a stack of crates that collapsed around him. "All hands," someone bellowed down the hatch. "The tempest off the starboard bow." Hope surged through Timothy as the guard abandoned his post to join the defense. Elias had followed them. The boy scrambled toward the ladder, then hesitated. The locket remained his priority, the reason for everything that had happened. Changing direction, he darted toward the captain's cabin, snatching the brass key from its hook. The ornate door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing Redmond's surprisingly austere quarters. Unlike Elias's cabin, filled with charts and practical navigation tools, Redmond's space contained shelves of leather-bound books, delicate scientific instruments, and a collection of maps, protected under glass. On the desk, secured in a small wooden frame, hung his mother's broken locket. Timothy crossed the cabin quickly, retrieving the keepsake with trembling fingers. As another cannon blast rocked the ship, he noticed a leather-bound journal open beside the frame. The page displayed a detailed sketch of the locket, with annotations in Redmond's precise handwriting. Mechanism requires specific pressure point. Child's fingers, perhaps. Hayes mentioned inheritance. Understanding bloomed in Timothy's mind. His father had designed the locket to open only for him, small fingers applying pressure in a specific sequence. The pattern would be something meaningful, something a father would expect his son to remember. Another violent impact threw Timothy to the floor as splinters exploded from the cabin wall. The battle was intensifying. Time was running out. Clutching the locket tightly, Timothy recalled his father's last gift, the wooden toy boat. The sequence of carvings along its hull had seemed decorative, but now Timothy's fingers found the nearly invisible indentations along the locket's edge, pressing them in the same pattern as the boat's carved symbols. With a soft click, the damaged hinge released, and the locket opened fully for the first time in years. Inside, where the portraits of his parents had been visible even through the damaged casing, lay a tightly folded piece of translucent paper, covered with his father's handwriting. Dawn painted the horizon crimson, as the tempest pursued the Crimson Serpent through a narrow channel flanked by treacherous reefs. Elias stood at the helm, his face granite hard as he navigated the dangerous passage. Behind him, Clara gripped the railing, her wounded shoulder bandaged, but her determination undiminished. "Port side battery ready, Captain," Josiah reported, his voice carrying above the wind. "Hold fire." Elias commanded, "We need to close the distance." Admiral Hamilton emerged from below deck, where he had been consulting with his surviving officers. "Redmond's heading for Devil's Throat," he observed grimly. "If he clears those twin peaks before us, we'll lose him in the maze beyond." Clara approached Elias, her face pale but resolute. "Give me a pistol." Elias studied her briefly before unhooking one of the twin silver-inlaid pistols from his belt. Weapons that had become his signature among Caribbean pirates. "You know how to use this." "Jonathan taught me." She checked the weapon with practiced hands. "When we board, I'm coming with you." "Clara," Elias began to object. "My son," she interrupted firmly. "My fight." A flurry of activity on the Crimson Serpent caught their attention. Gun ports opened along her starboard side as Redmond prepared to make his stand in the narrowest part of the channel, where the tempest would have limited maneuverability. "He's turning to fight," Hamilton observed. Classic naval tactic when pursued into confined waters. Elias's hands tightened on the wheel. "Then we give him what he expects." He raised his voice to carry across the deck. "All hands prepare for close engagement. Gunners, target their masts, not their hull. We want to cripple, not sink." The crew moved with disciplined precision, preparing grappling hooks and boarding axes. Hamilton's naval officers integrated seamlessly with the pirates, their shared purpose temporarily overriding years of mutual hostility. "There!" Clara suddenly pointed toward the Crimson Serpent's quarterdeck. "Timothy," through his spyglass, Elias confirmed the boy's presence, standing beside Captain Redmond, unbound but clearly under guard. The message was unmistakable: "Approach with caution." "Redmond uses the boy as shield," Hamilton growled. "Dishonorable tactics, effective ones," Elias corrected, collapsing his spyglass. "We need a diversion." He turned to Josiah. "Signal Fletcher. Execute the Havana maneuver." Understanding dawned on the first mate's weathered face. "Aye, Captain. Though we've never attempted it in such narrow waters, then today we make history." Elias's grim smile held no humor. "Assuming we survive it." The tempest surged forward, seemingly intent on a direct confrontation. The Crimson Serpent's cannons roared in response, sending iron balls whistling toward the attacking vessel. Most splashed harmlessly into the sea, but one struck the Tempest's forecastle, splintering wood and sending men scrambling for cover. Instead of returning fire, the Tempest maintained her aggressive approach. On her deck, Sailors hurled grappling hooks toward the Crimson Serpent's railings, while others prepared to board. "He's making it too easy," Hamilton muttered. "Redmond will suspect a trap." "He's meant to." Elias surrendered the wheel to Josiah. "When I give the signal, bring her hard to starboard and deploy the sweeps." Below decks, Fletcher and a hand-picked crew waited in the Tempest launch bay, a modified cargo hold with a hinged section of hull that could open to deploy smaller vessels while at sea. The innovation, inspired by Elias's observations of Mediterranean galleys, remained one of the Tempest's most closely guarded secrets. As the two ships drew within pistol range, Elias raised his remaining silver pistol and fired a single shot, not at the Crimson Serpent, but into the air. Immediately, the Tempest veered sharply starboard, her hidden sweeps deploying to execute a turn impossibly tight for a vessel her size. Simultaneously, the launch bay opened and Fletcher's boat shot out from the Tempest's port side, circling behind the Crimson Serpent while her attention remained fixed on the larger threat. Confusion erupted aboard Redmond's vessel as she attempted to adjust to the Tempest's unexpected maneuver. In the chaos, Fletcher's small boat reached the Crimson Serpent's undefended stern, where his men began a silent ascent using climbing hooks and ropes. Elias and Clara led the frontal assault, swinging across on boarding lines as the Tempest's grappling hooks secured the two ships together. Naval officers and pirates alike poured onto Redmond's deck, engaging his crew in fierce combat. "Find Timothy," Elias shouted to Clara above the din of battle. She nodded, already moving through the chaos with single-minded purpose, the silver pistol gripped firmly in her hand. Years of genteel society life had melted away, revealing a mother's ferocity that rivaled any pirate's bloodlust. Redmond's men fought with the desperation of cornered predators. Cutlasses clashed, pistols discharged their single shots. The deck grew slick with blood. Elias cut a path toward the quarterdeck where Redmond held Timothy, his blade finding targets with lethal precision. Admiral Hamilton fought nearby, his formal naval training supplemented by a lifetime at sea. Despite his age, he dispatched opponents with economical movements that belied his years. "Behind you," Elias warned, spinning to intercept a pirate lunging at the Admiral's unprotected back. Hamilton nodded his thanks, the momentary alliance between Admiral and pirate captain deepening through shared combat. On the quarterdeck, Redmond maintained his composure despite the battle raging around him. He kept one hand firmly on Timothy's shoulder, the other holding a pistol casually aimed at the boy's head. "That's far enough, Blackwood," he called as Elias approached, sword red with blood. "I've always admired your tactical creativity, but this ends now." "Let the boy go, Redmond," Elias replied, his voice dangerously calm. "This is between us." "On the contrary," Redmond smiled thinly, "the boy is central to everything. Show him what you found, Timothy." Timothy's hand trembled slightly as he held up the opened locket, the paper inside partially visible. "It's a letter," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "From my father, not just a letter," Redmond corrected. "The final piece we've all sought, confirmation of the San Cristobal's exact resting place and the location of the documents within her hull." A flicker of movement behind Redmond caught Elias's attention. Clara, emerging silently from the captain's cabin, silver pistol raised. Their eyes met briefly, a wordless plan forming between them. "You've lost, Redmond," Elias said, deliberately drawing the captain's focus. "The Phantom has fled, your crew is overwhelmed, and you stand alone." "Hardly alone while I hold Hayes's air," Redmond countered, tightening his grip on Timothy's shoulder. "Now, surrender your weapon or—" The deck suddenly tilted violently, as Fletcher's men, having infiltrated below decks, sabotaged the Crimson Serpent's rudder. Redmond stumbled, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the air. In that crucial moment, Timothy drove his elbow backward with all his strength, striking Redmond's midsection just as his mother had taught him during their weeks aboard the Tempest. The captain's grip loosened enough for Timothy to wrench free. "Mother," the boy cried, running toward Clara. Redmond recovered quickly, raising his pistol toward the fleeing child. Hayes' blood ends today. Two shots rang out simultaneously, Clara's silver pistol and Elias's thrown dagger, finding their marks. Redmond staggered backward, blood blossoming on his chest from both wounds, his own unfired second pistol clattering to the deck. As the captain fell to his knees, Timothy reached his mother's embrace. Elias approached the dying Redmond, kneeling beside him with unexpected solemnity. "You could have walked away," Elias said quietly. "The sea offers second chances to most who seek them." Redmond's laugh turned to a wet cough. Says the man who waited 30 nights to honor a debt, his eyes still sharp despite approaching death, fixed on Elias. "We're not so different, you and I, just serving different masters." "The difference," Elias replied, "is I chose my obligations freely. As did I." Redmond's gaze shifted to Admiral Hamilton, who had joined them on the quarterdeck. "Isn't that right, Admiral? Tell Blackwood, who really commissioned me to find those documents." Hamilton's face remained impassive. "Save your breath for confessing your sins, Redmond. You'll need it shortly." The dying captain smiled through bloodied teeth. "The boy has his father's letter now. The truth can't be contained." His hand clutched weakly at Elias's sleeve. "Watch your back, Blackwood. Pirates aren't the only predators in these waters." With those enigmatic words, Captain Isaiah Redmond, scourge of the Caribbean, hunter of the San Cristobal's secrets, closed his eyes for the final time. The governor's mansion in Charleston stood bright against the evening sky, lanterns illuminating its colonial grandeur, as carriages delivered guests for what the local society papers had described as a gathering of notable maritime interests. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated meeting to determine the fate of several individuals whose recent adventures had upset the delicate balance of power in the Caribbean. Elias adjusted his unfamiliar formal attire, a concession to protocol rather than personal preference. Beside him, Clara appeared transformed in a gown befitting her station as an admiral's daughter, though the steel in her eyes remained unchanged by the trappings of civilization. "You look uncomfortable, Captain," Governor Preston observed, with barely concealed amusement as they were announced in the reception hall. "I find constraints of any kind restrictive, Governor." Elias replied evenly, "Yet here you stand, contemplating the most constrictive of all, a royal pardon with conditions." Preston gestured toward his private study. "Shall we discuss those conditions now? Admiral Hamilton and your young charge await us." In the book-lined study, Timothy sat with his grandfather, examining a detailed map of the Carolina coastline. The boy had grown noticeably in the 2 months since Redmond's defeat, both in stature and demeanor. The admiral, too, seemed changed. His rigid military bearing softened slightly in his grandson's presence. "Mother, father," Timothy called, the latter term now used without hesitation, having decided for himself how to address the man who had married his mother and risked everything to rescue him. Clara embraced her son, while Elias acknowledged him with a nod that contained more affection than any casual observer might detect. The family dynamic that had begun as a pragmatic arrangement had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. "I trust you've considered my proposal carefully," Governor Preston said once pleasantries were exchanged. He removed a document from his desk, the official pardon bearing the colony's seal and his signature. "We have," Elias confirmed, "though certain aspects require clarification, such as the matter of the San Cristobal documents." Admiral Hamilton interjected, "Their disposition remains of critical importance to the Crown." Timothy glanced between the adults, the weight of his father's letter evident in his expression. Jonathan Hayes's final message had indeed revealed the galleon's location, but it had contained other revelations as well, including the admiral's clandestine role in commissioning both naval officers and pirates in the search for documents that could reshape colonial politics. "The documents will be recovered," Elias stated firmly, "and delivered to proper authorities." Meaning, Preston pressed. "Meaning those who will ensure they serve their intended purpose, preventing unnecessary bloodshed rather than provoking it." Elias's gaze moved meaningfully to Hamilton. The admiral stiffened. "You presume to dictate terms to the Crown?" I presume to honor Jonathan Hayes's final wishes, Elias corrected. As outlined in his letter to his son, a tense silence filled the room, broken unexpectedly by Clara. Perhaps this discussion would benefit from viewing the matter from a different perspective. She withdrew a small portrait from her reticule, a recently commissioned painting showing Elias, Clara, and Timothy together, the first tangible representation of their unconventional family. Jonathan entrusted his son's future to Captain Blackwood, she continued, placing the portrait on the governor's desk, and in doing so, created a family where none existed before. The question now is whether that family has a place in your vision of colonial society, Governor. Preston studied the portrait thoughtfully, a pirate captain transformed into a respectable citizen through marriage to an admiral's daughter. The gossips would feast for months. A smile played at his lips. I admit it has a certain poetic appeal. The pardon would include provisions for maintaining command of my vessel, Elias clarified, redirected toward purposes that serve colonial interests rather than oppose them. Privateering, Hamilton stated flatly, legal piracy under the Crown's ban. Call it what you will, Elias shrugged. The sea remains my home, Admiral. I merely propose changing the flag under which I sail. Timothy had remained quiet during the negotiations, but now he stepped forward. My first father, believed Captain Blackwood was an honorable man, despite his profession. That's why he trusted him with half the chart and with our protection. His young face held a seriousness beyond his years. I believe the same. The simple declaration carried unexpected weight, particularly with Admiral Hamilton, whose expression softened perceptibly. Your father was an excellent judge of character, he conceded. Perhaps better than I gave him credit for. Governor Preston nodded, seeming satisfied. Then we have the outline of an agreement. Captain Blackwood receives his pardon and retains command of his vessel as a sanctioned privateer. The Hayes family remains under his protection, with young Timothy to receive proper education befitting his grandfather's station. He dipped his pen in ink. The San Cristobal documents, when recovered, will be reviewed jointly by representatives of my office and the Admiralty before any action is taken. As the men formalized the agreement, Clara drew Timothy aside. Are you certain about this part? Life aboard ship is not what I would have chosen for you. It's not forever, Mother, Timothy replied with surprising wisdom. Grandfather says I can attend the Naval Academy when I'm older, if I wish. But for now, his gaze drifted to Elias. I want to learn from him, about the sea, about my father, about how to keep promises. Later, as they departed the governor's mansion, the three walked together toward the harbor, where the Tempest waited, her black sails replaced with new canvas bearing the colonial insignia alongside Elias's personal standard. Will the crew accept this change? Clara asked as the ship came into view, transformed yet recognizable. Those who value freedom within structure will remain, Elias replied. The others will find their own paths. And us? She questioned softly. What path do we follow now? Elias considered the woman who had begun as his obligation and become something far more complex. That, he said, taking her hand with unexpected gentleness, is a chart we'll draft together. Timothy ran ahead toward the gangplank, eager to return to the vessel that had become his second home. Clara and Elias followed at a more measured pace, their hands still joined in a gesture that had evolved from formal necessity to chosen companionship. At the helm of the Tempest, the family stood together, a pirate captain who had found unexpected redemption, a gentlewoman who had discovered her own strength, and a boy who carried the legacy of two fathers. As the ship navigated away from Charleston harbor toward the open sea, they faced the horizon not as reluctant allies bound by circumstance, but as a family forged through loyalty, courage, and the most unexpected of love stories.